Chapter 1850. Hatrick. The scene returns to the battlefield where Zhang Yi and Merlin are. The huge bottomless abyss cave is filled with thick, green vines. Merlin's wand transformed into a lightsaber and began fighting Zhang Yi. His fighting style is very similar to that of King Arthur and Lancelot, both using swords to attack and defend, and it even makes Zhang Yi feel that these Western Europeans only know how to use swords. However, since the opponent was good at using a sword, Zhang Yi didn't need to fight up close. He looked around at the huge green abyss, which was probably a cylindrical passage about 5 kilometers in diameter. In that case, he knew how to fight. Zhang Yi's right hand, divine refinement, was still constantly spewing out holy silver bullets, eroding Merlin's supernatural abilities. His left hand pointed back at the sky, slowly opening up dozens of dimensional gates that could cover the entire cross-section of the abyss. Lord of War, within the confines of this limited space, there could be no more suitable means of attack than this full-coverage strike. Merlin had nowhere to hide, and even if he fled downward, the bombardment from his cannons would only intensify with the force of gravity. Merlin brandished the lightsaber in his hands to block off Zhang Yi's barrage of holy silver bullets. But when he looked up and saw the dense array of black muzzles pointed downward, his face could not help but change. "It's more troublesome than I thought." Zhang Yi's cold voice entered his ears. Experience the wonderful feeling of being bombarded by Fremon's entire arsenal. The supernatural power level was suppressed to around 10,000 points, and the supernatural powers and strengths of both sides were the same. Then the effect of these heat weapons became apparent. So many heat weapons bombarding him, even if they couldn't kill Merlin, they were enough to make him suffer greatly. Johnny knew exactly how to maximize his strengths. Merlin was not him, and did not have that kind of defense that was almost immune to physical attacks. Boom, boom, boom. A volley of cannon fire. The array of cannons in the sky, covering the entire cross-section of the passage, roared and fired downwards. The sky was filled with the light and shadows of flames. It was the most magnificent display of fireworks. Countless shells and bullets fell towards the bottom, leaving Merlin no space to escape. Even if he chose to hack through the rock wall to avoid them, Zhang Yi could easily chase after him. Besides, his ability was not necessarily good at carving holes in the rock wall. From this depth, the location they were in was at least tens of thousands of meters underground, and the rock formation was harder than gold and iron, making it difficult to excavate. Merlin looked up at the sky. The dense rain of gunfire made him narrow his eyes slightly. The lightsaber in his hand slowly dissipated, returning to its original appearance as a wand. Zhang Yi looked expressionlessly downwards, trying to see what method Merlin would use to counter this move. However, the next moment, a scene appeared before his eyes that caused his pupils to shrink and his mind to momentarily become confused.
How could this be?
There are really not many scenes that can make Yi feel this surprised. He thinks that he has seen too many strange abilities in his life. However, as he watched Merlin raise his hand and open one after another dimensional gate in front of him, collecting all the ammunition inside, he still couldn't remain calm, because that was clearly an ability similar to his. Merlin's face was wearing a smile, and the palm of his left hand was pointed at the sky. He suddenly narrowed his eyes and smiled. "I'll give you back all your attacks." The next moment, from within those dimensional gates, all the ammunition attacks that he had absorbed suddenly reversed direction and blasted back towards the sky. Full counterattack. Zhang Yi was beyond words of surprise. This was not like his ability, this was clearly his ability. Although Zhang Yi was surprised, he quickly opened the dimensional gates again and collected all the bullets. He did not rush to the next move, but calmed himself down and observed Merlin carefully. Around him, one-dimensional gate after another surrounded him. This was clearly the same ability as Zhang Yi's everything under heaven. Zhang Yi's thoughts raced, and suddenly he asked, "Your ability, can you copy other people's abilities?" Hearing Zhang Yi's question, Merlin beamed and replied through the voice channel, "Guess if I can?" That's it. Zhang Yi had already made his decision. No wonder he felt that Merlin's fighting style was so similar to King Arthur's. Can he copy other people's abilities? Before, it was King Arthur's, so his fighting style was with a sword. And now, he's copied my ability. Doesn't that mean I'm going to be fighting myself? This really made Genie feel at a loss. He has always acted in the most prudent manner throughout his life. So his abilities, like himself, have almost no loopholes. Unlike other people's abilities, which may have some kind of loophole, if you don't have enough proficiency after obtaining an ability, it's easy for someone to take advantage of it. But his abilities can be used directly after obtaining them. The second hand of time and everything under heaven alone are perfect abilities that leave no gaps in his defense. But right now, I'm not sure if he can really copy my abilities. It might just be some kind of appearance. Even if he can copy my abilities, to what extent can he copy them, and how much can he copy? Is it just the abilities I showed him, or is it all of them? Zhang Yi was unable to confirm this information, so he was unable to attack for the time being. Because of his attack, it was difficult to break through his own defense. In contrast, Merlin saw through Zhang Yi's hesitation and instead, with a smile, took the initiative to attack. I've copied all of your abilities, Lord Chaos. Now, let's see what kind of landscape will be created when a dimensional gate collides with a dimensional gate. With that, he suddenly opened a dimensional gate in front of him, then charged towards Zhang Yi, activating Space Shuffle. The distance between the two of them was quickly closed, and he really wrapped himself in the gates of 3,000 realms and crashed into Zhang Yi. The Knights of the Round Table Court Magician Merlin Ability Code Deprivation of Divine Authority Supernatural Ability Index 31,000 points. He is the hidden number 2 of the Knights of the Round Table. Don't get me wrong, by hidden number 2, I don't mean that he is the second most powerful person in hiding. Rather, his strength is comparable to that of King Arthur, the leader of the Knights of the Round Table, except that compared to the king in the limelight, he is more willing to be a supporting official behind the scenes. Deprivation of Divine Authority allows you to duplicate the abilities of a mutant with 100% accuracy. At this time, Zhang Yi's ability index is also 31,000 points. Therefore, the level he can achieve is exactly the same as Zhang Yi's. It is possible that there will be some differences in proficiency when they first obtain their abilities. But now, with exactly the same ability index and ability level, the competition is about who can use their abilities more skillfully. The dimensional gate collided, a collision between different spaces, and the result was naturally the collapse and fragmentation of each other. The broken doors in midair were like pieces of glass, and only those with space abilities could see the magnificent, incomplete beauty. Zhang Yi's pupils contracted, and then he quickly retreated. He would never collide with the opponent until he could figure out their abilities. Once all the dimensional gates were broken, his defensive power would be greatly reduced, and his combat effectiveness would be reduced by at least 50%. Haha, it really turns out that you rely heavily on these dimensional gates. Merlin's mocking voice came, and he chased even more closely behind. But if you just keep running, you won't be able to kill me. In that case, this battle will never end. Zhang Yi ran towards the top of the endless cave, with Merlin in hot pursuit. Here, the proficiency in using abilities showed. Although the principle of using Space Shuffle was very simple, just open 2 doors to travel through, due to the difference in proficiency, Merlin would lag behind every time he opened the doors and made the jump. The time gap each time might be less than 0.01 milliseconds. However, this difference in proficiency was enough for Zhang Yi to pull away from him between each jump. Merlin's attempt to make the dimensional gates collide was impossible to achieve. Since he dared to play with me like this, it means he has other tricks up his sleeve. First, I don't know how many abilities he can use. Maybe after smashing all my dimensional gates, he can copy the abilities of other mutants and fight me. Then I'm finished. So you can't get close to him, but attacking from a distance, I can't break through my own dimensional gates. Sniping from a long distance or attacks like the Lord of Wars are also ineffective. What on earth am I supposed to do? Xiong Yi's face was a little solemn, and in the corner of his left eye, a clock began to appear. He looked back and saw that in the left eye of Merlin, the ability to predict the future with a second hand of time had also been activated. Could it be that he can only copy it when I display my ability? Zhang Yi knew full well that at this time, he was at a disadvantage in terms of intelligence. Then the next battle, which would involve the realm of time, would become even more complicated. The only advantage is that he can take advantage of his skill proficiency in a short period of time. However, the smile on Merlin's lips could no longer be suppressed. After obtaining Zhang Yi's ability, his excited eyes were shaking. Time and space. These two abilities are so powerful, my god. Either of these two abilities is enough to allow a mutant to reach the supreme realm, and you alone can possess both. This is truly envy-inducing. The ripples in his left eye began to predict the future. If two people both had the ability of time and could predict the future, then what would test them was their calculation power. It would be like rock, paper, scissors. Merlin, as the mastermind behind the Knights of the Round Table, was very intelligent and quickly mastered the use of this skill. So he chose to speed up and chase after Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi did not let him catch up, but kept his distance and kept flying towards the sky. Meanwhile, he muttered to himself, "There's only one way to find out if he can use all of my abilities, keep fighting, and see if he can show off any other abilities. And even if he can copy my abilities, he can't possibly copy all the objects in my dimensional space, right?" Thinking this, Johnny took out a large number of flash bombs and smoke bombs directly from the dimensional gate. After throwing them downwards, he didn't look back as he fled upwards. As soon as they left the dimensional gate, they were detonated. Then a strong light enveloped the long passage, and a thick smoke filled the space. Although Merlin's combat suit could reduce the stimulation of bright light on his eyes, he could not obtain the light and shadow, and he also missed Zhang Yi's direction. He used dimensional space to collect all Zhang Yi. But when he looked again to get a better view of his surroundings, Zhang Yi's figure had disappeared. Merlin thought for a moment, then quickly looked around. The sky was still very far away. It was impossible to have left this passage with almost no boundaries in just a moment of distraction. Then, the only possibility was that he had hidden in another direction. Merlin's gaze swept inch by inch around him, his eyes fixed on the wall of the passage covered in green vines. Did he hide in the rock wall? Merlin's voice grew louder. "Lord Chaos, if all you know is how to run away, this battle will never end." In the void, there was a barely noticeable. That was the door Zhang Yi had left behind after activating his void world departure, ability to observe the situation outside. Merlin was currently enveloping his entire body in everything under heaven and was afraid to make any sudden moves, obviously worried that Zhang Yi would suddenly attack him from some direction. Zhang Yi now understood a little better. The only abilities he has acquired so far are my everything under heaven and the second hand of time, and he doesn't know that I can hide myself in the void world departure. In other words, the prerequisite for duplicating my abilities is that he has seen me use an ability with his own eyes. Therefore, in the future, I will avoid using other abilities unless it is a matter of deciding the outcome of a fight, and he has never used the props in my dimensional space, which means that the objects in dimensional space cannot be replicated. He did. The information has become much richer. But the biggest problem was in front of Zhang Yi. How is he going to break his own defense? A thought came to Zhang Yi's mind. Should he try to starve him to death? Zhang Yi thought about it for a while, but decided to ask the administrator first. The administrator of a mighty god-level civilization is like an almighty god here, so Zhang Yi directly asked with his mind, "Is there a time limit to this trial?" The administrator's voice immediately sounded in Zhang Yi's mind. There are no restrictions on the trial, and the outcome will only be determined based on the final outcome of life or death. The dimension of time here is different from the outside world, only 1/10 of the normal time flow rate. Zhang Yi let out a sigh of relief in his heart, thinking, even if I continue to waste time like this, I can also wear you down to death. He did not rush to the next step because he wanted to think about how to defeat Merlin, who could replicate his abilities. Time flows incredibly slowly in the void, which gave Zhang Yi a considerable amount of time. It allowed him to ponder and summarize all the differences between the two of them in order to find a way to exploit his opponent's strengths. After waiting for a long time, Merlin slowly furrowed his brow. He had finally confirmed one thing. Chaos was no longer here. He really escaped? I understand. Since he doesn't know how to defeat himself, he's running away to figure it out. Merlin knew how difficult it was to kill an opponent of the same level head-on. He was also prepared for a protracted battle. There was no shortage of supplies in his combat suit, and the compressed nutrient solution was enough to sustain him for half a month. However, in order to maintain peak fighting condition, he decided to find food. Since there were plants everywhere, there must be something to eat. Merlin looked up at the sky and then at his feet, and finally decided to fly upwards. Because there was still a chance that he could find Zhang Yi up there. What he didn't expect was that Zhang Yi hadn't gone anywhere and was still in the same place. It wasn't until Merlin had left that Zhang Yi appeared from the void. The short period of time that had passed had been a rather long time for his thoughts. His mind was clear at the moment, and he had already thought of a countermeasure. Luckily, he hasn't learned the void world departure technique. Zhang Yi took a deep breath, as this was his strongest defensive move. Looking at the many plants around him, Zhang Yi picked some up and stored them in his dimensional space to take back to Zhouke for research. Then he began to implement his plan. As he had expected, he would have to fight a protracted battle with Merlin here. Zhang Yi's greatest advantage as a mutant with special space abilities is that he has an adequate supply of resources. Even if he were to go to another world, the resources in his possession would be enough to support him for a lifetime. Without thinking, Zhang Yi directly disappeared into the rock wall and then opened up a huge world of dimensional space. Immediately, he waved his hand and took his Tianhai fortress out of dimensional space. Yes, when he arrived, he was worried about the destruction of his home, and also for convenience's sake, so he simply brought his home with him. Looking at his familiar home, Zhang Yi felt incredibly at ease. He entered the house, where it was still warm and the lights were warm. The soft carpet was a palm-size thick, and stepping on it felt like stepping on a cloud. Zhang Yi sat on the sofa. Although Yang Xia wasn't there to pour him coffee, he could still get food and drink by himself. Let's take a break for 10 or 15 days. Zhang Yi simply gave up. He knew that a character like Merlin would be hard-pressed to starve or thirst to death in a short period of time. But so what? As a high-ranking noble of Britannia, if he couldn't get enough high-quality food for a long time, he would certainly not be able to maintain a normal state of health. A person who eats beef and drinks coffee every day can also live on wild vegetables and mountain spring water. But 3 or 5 days is one thing, and after 10 or 15 days, whether or not the intestines and stomach can adapt is one thing, and the mind will definitely be affected. And there is a very crucial point. This is not the world they live in at all. According to Zhang Yi's thinking, this is most likely the world from their era that was preserved by the mighty god-level civilization, that is, the world of the ancient era. Living things are different, and naturally so are microorganisms. Can Merlin's body withstand the attacks of microorganisms in such a world? Let's wait and see. Zhang Yi leisurely began to enjoy life, and asked the intelligent system to turn on the TV and watch some Tibetan films that Wang Gongzi had left behind. But back to Merlin, he was not having it so easy. Zhang Yi hid himself in the shadows, and had the Tianhai fortress to rest in. Merlin, on the other hand, was in the posture of a field special forces soldier. He had to maintain everything under heaven at all times, avoid Zhang Yi suddenly launching an attack, and then find Zhang Yi's location to face off against him. But after a long time, he still hadn't found Zhang Yi. Half a day passed. Merlin frowned. Has this guy really hidden himself away? What's the point of doing that? No, he must be planning something. I must find him. 1 day passed. Merlin didn't get any sleep that night. He was able to stay awake for 3 days and nights thanks to medication. He could not sleep peacefully because there was someone in this world who wanted to kill him at any time. Only now did he fully understand what Zhang Yi intended to do. He wants to fight a war of attrition with me. The previous confidence and composure in Merlin's eyes slowly disappeared, replaced by shock and awe. A first-class master of the Huashu kingdom is actually playing so dirty. Is it that difficult to have a straightforward confrontation? At that moment, Zhang Yi, who had just woken up from the soft velvet bed, opened the curtains with his hands and enjoyed the artificial sunlight outside, letting the warm light fall on his face as he stretched comfortably. Let's guess, when will that guy crack? In the following days, Merlin tried even harder to find Zhang-Yi. However, this world was really huge. The battlefields set by the administrators were specially created for the testers. Zhang-Yi is a mutant with space abilities, so his battlefield is incredibly large. The long corridor seems to lead to the center of the Earth, and there is no end in sight. And once Zhang-Yi chooses to hide among the rock walls somewhere, Merlin simply doesn't have a good way to dig him out. Space Shuffle doesn't leave a trace. And the ability that Merlin has copied of Zhang-Yi's doesn't include his powerful attack ability, and it is impossible to destroy all the areas. Do you really think you can force me to give him like this? Chaos, you've underestimated me. Merlin let out a sigh, plucked a huge fruit from the greenery, and it was covered in thorns and as big as his arm. You probably don't know that I once served in the 21st Airborne Special Service Regiment of Britannia. How to obtain food and survive in the harsh environment of the wilderness is common sense in my life. He took out a metal syringe from his combat uniform and inserted it into the wild fruit, and soon the microbial community and nutritional content became apparent. There are plenty of supplies here, and I can live forever. Let's see who can't hold out first.